Connie Willis, the podcast. Taking you into new ways of thinking, even providing answers to questions you've often pondered. Connie Willis, the podcast.
All righty. Hey there, Steve. How you doing?
Fine.
Thanks for calling in. We're going to just get right into it. I'm going to do your intro a little bit later on.
Yeah.
Okay.
The way you want to do it, kiddo.
Okay, great. All right. First off, the biggest thing I really, really want to get from you, and then I'm going to probably go into some other stuff with you, is can you tell me the latest disclosure update?
Okay, we're underway. Is that what you're saying?
We are totally, we're going.
Oh, okay. Latest disclosure update.
Yeah, what's going on now? I know that the Pope came out recently, and now Stephen Hawkins is Stephen's doing his
Stephen
thing.
Hawking, yes. Disclosure is a funny thing. It's not like one would get the latest update on Iraq, right, or the Afghanistan war, where you have a whole lot happening in real time, and there's always something new every day. Disclosure is, in fact, it's two things. It's a process, right, in which information is slowly coming out in different venues and different places around the world regarding the UFO-ET issue. And there's things happening a little bit there every day, but it's not voluminous. And then you have disclosure with a capital D, which is the formal acknowledgement of the ET presence, which is the goal of the advocacy effort. And there are things that are happening on a given time that sort of impact that. So it's not your typical kind of news thing that you update on. With that in mind, with respect to the disclosure with a small d, in a few years, a number of countries have been releasing thousands of UFO files, declassifying and releasing them to the public arena, sometimes on websites or what have you. This has been an ongoing thing that goes all the way back really to 2004. And the most recent one was just about, I would say, about 7 weeks ago, and that was New Zealand. Joined Canada and Australia, the United Kingdom, France, Denmark, Sweden, Brazil, and a few other countries in announcing it was releasing a lot of UFO files. That was significant. We had a number of things developing regarding the church, which have continued to unfold, as well as in what I would call mainstream science. And they've kind of dovetailed together a little bit. Now, here's what I mean. First, you had the Vatican announcements of last year, going all the way back to, I think it was July, but Father Gabriel Funes, the head of Vatican astronomer, came forward and indicated in an interview that the Catholic Church had no trouble with extraterrestrials, other intelligence is no problem, and what have you. This was essentially a formal confirmation of what Corrado Balducci, Monsignor and former exorcist, had been saying in retirement. That was noted, and then it was repeated again later in the year, and then in November, the Vatican held an astrobiology conference in which scientists from around the world came to discuss this issue at the Vatican itself. And then just 2 months later, you had a exobiology conference at the London Royal Society. One of the scientists involved in that was Paul Davies, who brought up the idea of extraterrestrial life being something we need to look for, but maybe look in different places. And it generated all kinds of news, all well and good. And so you have these conferences going on not only at the Vatican, but at the Royal Society. And then a few months after the Royal Society meeting, suddenly Stephen Hawking decides to make a pronouncement, namely, okay, look, aliens exist, almost certainly, but we shouldn't talk to them. So this is the kind of thing that an activist in this field watches for. And here's another issue. This is not untrue of other political issues and other issues in the world today. You don't look at the actual words. You look behind them. You read between the lines. This is non-trivial. And so when Stephen Hawking comes out and makes that statement, a lot of people criticized him and that are involved in the UFO-ET issue because clearly he's behind the times. He doesn't know. We've been talking to aliens for a very long time.
Wow,
and they're here.
I look at it and say, okay, it's coming. They're letting more and more people are beginning to tell it and be open with it.
Exactly. And what I saw was the first part. Aliens exist. Basically, this is Stephen Hawking sort of speaking for science and saying, okay, look, aliens exist. We know that, right? But then, we shouldn't talk to them. So what's happening here is that, and not surprisingly, scientists, and I know for a fact that a lot of these scientists, Connie, they got UFO libraries in their basement. They're UFO buffs, a lot of them. They read this stuff, they know about it, they're thrilled about it, but they do nothing public. Because again, there's been a truth embargo underway for 60 years, and it's understood you just don't talk about these things publicly in proper company, right? But they're interested. They know the subject. This is also true of many in the church, and so and these people have their connections. They have inside access to some degree, particularly high-level scientists, as well as high-level people in the church. And so, if I'm correct and the disclosure is very close, then these people are being tipped off. They probably know this. They probably have a pretty good idea that something is coming, and what they're doing is positioning themselves. The scientists can't just suddenly come out and say, oh, wow, guess what? You know, ETs are here. I've always known that. Oh, no. They have to step into the pool, a little bit at a time. They can't just suddenly reverse course. And so Davies goes to London Royal Society meeting and starts talking about extraterrestrials. Maybe we look in a different place for them. Hawking comes out and says, well, they exist. These are scientists trying to, quote, make a U-turn, right? They're slowly trying to turn their worldview of ship a little bit around so that they're going roughly in the right direction. Same thing is happening with the Catholic Church. This is the way to look at this issue. When it comes to political actions like in the Obama administration, people are looking, has he said anything about UFOs? Of course he hasn't. Has he given any clear indications he would do anything? No, he hasn't. But he did sign an executive order reversing Bush's restrictions, imposed restrictions on the Presidential Records Act. He did sign a memorandum calling reform of the FOIA, and near the end of last year, he signed a presidential directive creating a national declassification center, first one of its kind, designed specifically to increase and reform the declassification process to get more stuff out faster. This is notable. People didn't pay much attention to it, but it's very significant to the disclosure process. So these are the things we look for as we try to assess what is happening as disclosure inevitably approaches. And overall, Connie, when I look, I find that the hints, the signs that I would expect to see. So my optimism that disclosure is very close for me.
Yeah, when you say close, though, are you talking months? Are you talking years? And do you also believe it's Obama that's going to bring it out? Do you think he's going to be the guy?
Yes to all those. The disclosure situation needs to be viewed this way. It could happen at any moment. We're in the can happen at any moment mode, okay? So that's worth noting, all right? That wasn't the case prior to the end of the Cold War, I can assure you.
Well,
the Cold War was a huge barrier.
Do you think
it wasn't going to happen while the Cold War was underway?
Well, why now? Is it because so many people are seeing so many things, there's so many leaks? Why now? And why not before?
Well, the reason is, all right, let's I use this analogy. When the Soviet Union finally started to disassemble, when this incredible ideological controlled state starts to unravel, literally to the point where the Berlin Wall comes down, the republics split apart, Germany eventually is united. When that happened, an obvious question would be, well, why now? Why didn't it happen 5 years earlier or 10 years earlier? Or why didn't it take another 5 years? And the answer is that the Soviet Union was forced together under an ideological system against really, I think historical pressure otherwise, as well as I think the will of the people. And so essentially what happened, not surprisingly, is that the pressure on the Soviet Union, the various internal stuff, started to slowly increase until the point it could not hold together. And the question was, well, when would it finally break apart? Same thing here. The truth embargo is a deliberate false misrepresentation of reality by the state for national security reasons. They are going to great lengths to try to persuade the people to believe there is no ET issue here when in fact there is. This is very difficult to do, and there has always been enormous pressure to continue to keep that truth bottled up, like a dam holding water back. And so, not surprisingly, over the last 15 years particularly, going back to, or even 20 years, going back to the end of the Cold War, the pressure on this embargo has grown and grown and grown in multiple ways. I mean, we could go on for some time about this. There are things impinging on it from many, many different sources. And so, at some point, the embargo breaks. And the question is when? When does it finally break? All I can say is that the pressure on it is enough to break it. It's enough to end it. But it's still a 62-year-old state policy, and ending it is not a simple matter, and so it hasn't happened yet. But you have to operate on the assumption that it could happen at any time. And the other way that I like to point this out to people who want to know when, I said you should think of the disclosure event in this way. It is inevitable, which is true, and it's soon, which is very likely true. But the question for us as a society, is it soon enough? Will it come soon enough? Or will something else happen that destroys or sets back the disclosure process, leaving us again in this reality dichotomy for another 4, 5, 10 years, which I think would be a very bad thing. So that's the way to think about it in terms of its current status and probability for resolution.
Well, when it happens, and you've been studying this for so long, Steve, I mean, I know you have slept in your car. I mean, you have just dedicated yourself to this disclosure. And when it happens, what is it going to happen? What do we expect? What do we even think?
Well,
is disclosure saying they're
quite
here,
like
or are they going to?
Before in history, so we're in uncharted territory. As I've said many times, for it to happen properly, it needs to be a proactive action on the part of the state, meaning they take the matter in hand, they go before their people, they tell them the fundamental truth that ETs are here, and then they, start the, quote, question and answer process, which could go on for a very long time. That's what needs to happen, as opposed to the issue finally getting to the point where the media just can't stand it any longer, and they break ranks, and you've got a media firestorm, and you've got reporters chasing the president or the president's spokesperson or the Secretary of State or the head of CIA up and down the halls of their respective offices, with their cameras clicking and their pens clicking, saying, well, what about this, and what about that, and what about the ETs, and basically hounding them into having to admit, shucks, yeah, it's true. It's going to look terrible, and it's not going to be constructive. Or a worse scenario for the United States is that another country, more than capable, and most of the first world countries are, of bringing forward some fairly profound evidence and saying, yeah, ETs are here. We're telling our citizens now, and the United States has got to go, shucks. Yeah, well, it's true. This is not what we want, and so we want a proactive process. If it were to go that way, it would involve the president taking a little bit of time from the networks, probably announcing that a major announcement is about to be made from a press conference that's being held at some appropriate facility, and something to the effect that he fully authorizes the release of this information, and wants the people of the country to be attentive, but not be alarmed. and he may very well not make the announcement himself. I've always suspected it would go that way. It depoliticizes it. And then you go to a press conference, and there is a moderator there, carefully chosen, and it's the moderator, a neutral, nonpartisan person, who makes the announcement to the American people and to the world, and then a fairly distinguished group of individuals will take some questions and make a few statements. To me, that's probably how disclosure will take place. Not overly dramatic, but yet it'll get people's attention, and then other countries will very quickly follow suit, one after another. There is a possibility, though I consider slim, that a number of countries will jointly act, meaning they will come out in joint announcement, but I have a hunch I don't think that'll happen. And then at that point, once the acknowledgement is done, we are in the post-disclosure world. We've crossed the line. That's disclosure. No, it's over, right? Nothing more has to be done technically.
Well, what is
disclosed.
But what is disclosure? Is it that we have contact with UFOs, that they do exist, or that we have technology transfer, we've been doing this for 30, 40 years, or here they are and they're amongst us and this is what to look for, or here he is, everybody, ladies and gentlemen, here's the first ET on camera.
Well, you got it. You hit it. They're here. I mean, disclosure is they are here. It's not somewhere in the universe there's other life. No. There's not, we think there's microbes on Mars. No. It is non-human intelligence from elsewhere is engaging the planet in one form or another, meaning they're here. That's it. That is all it takes for disclosure to have happened. Everything else that we may learn about who they are and why they are here and what they are doing and what we may have done with them or connect to them or anything else, everything else after that is post-disclosure. This is an important concept, and not everybody gets it, and I can appreciate that. History is filled with these kinds of thresholds that have to be crossed. One of the better analogies to this is the women's suffrage movement. Women back in the 1900s, toward the end of the late 1800s rather, and early 1900s, they were struggling for rights. They were struggling for more economic improvement. They were struggling for a lot of things. And so there were multiple, quote, efforts underway with respect to the issues surrounding women. But there was one fundamental threshold that they had to cross if they were going to make serious advancement, and that was the right to vote. Right? And so the women's suffrage movement was about one thing. It was about the right to vote on a full-fledged federal level, no exceptions. And so the activist movement was focused on that. It wasn't the only thing going on. That threshold had enormous implications to all of women's issues. Think of disclosure that way. There's plenty going on in the world addressing the UFO-ET issue. But the threshold of disclosure must be crossed if we are to truly be able to advance our knowledge and understanding and also open up this issue to the world. So it is a threshold event, and that's why we define it specifically. That's why we put a capital D in front of it. That is the goal of the activism. The goal of the activism isn't to get a particular piece of information about a saucer or whatever. It is to get the governments of the world to finally acknowledge that the ET presence is in fact real and that they're here. It's that simple. And that's important because to the extent that it is simple and easy to understand, then it's going to be easier to galvanize people behind this movement to get that done.
Who do you think they is? Is it the Greys? I mean, the ETs themselves. Who do you think they are? Do you know?
Well, nobody knows with absolute certainty. We know that there are beings here. We know they're more than one kind. Beyond that, it gets very murky. Now, when I say we know, the most of the information we have about the extraterrestrials comes from direct contact, which is one of the most important issues in all of exopolitics, which is to say that many, many, many thousands of people have been having direct contact with extraterrestrials, some cases throughout their whole life. In many cases, the entire family is involved. We know this because in the late 70s and early 80s, primarily because of the work of 4 people, Bud Hopkins,
Yep.
David Jacobs,
We'll be talking to him.
John Mack, and Whitley Strieber. The work they did, the attention they got, the books they wrote. In the late 70s, early 80s, the contactee issue reemerged and broke out. It had been behind the scenes, somewhat engaged, but primarily closeted until then, and it all broke out.
And we're talking
and
abductions.
Since
here.
then, tens of thousands of contactees have come forward, mostly in print, with descriptions of their encounters with these ETs. And these accounts are sufficiently consistent to paint not only a pretty good bell curve of explanation, or at least bell curve of information, rather, but also to be confirmatory. There is simply no way that many people could come forward with relatively consistent stories and have it be some freak of nature, some oddity, or as some people have come forward, particularly Harvard, sleep paralysis. It's all ridiculous. And so the contact evidence is now, and to me, fully probative. And as a result, from that contact, we are pretty sure there are multiple species. We have a description, or general description, of 3 or 4 or 5 of them. They have various names, and that's what we know for sure, in my opinion.
Well, one of the most
Beyond
interesting...
that, we don't know much. We have a lot of information coming from psychic contact and channeled contact, but we simply cannot give that the kind of value that firsthand testimonies of physical contact provide. So all of that has to be pretty much put off to the side. But knowing that there's multiple species here is, I think, fairly significant. But trust me, all it takes is one species, one alien. That's all here, right? In a single spaceship, right? One seat spaceship. That's all it takes theoretically for us to cross the line into the post-disclosure world.
You know, one of the most interesting things as you're bringing up David Jacobs, I was just talking to him, and it's in his book, The Threat, but he talks about the Greys coming down here after all the abductions and when they come down to live. He doesn't say it's all going to be all that nice. He says it's going to be good for the abductees and the hybrids and the ETs themselves, but he didn't say anything very positive about the humans that are left down here. And then you have Stephen Hawkins come in and talk like he's talking and saying, hey, you know, if they come down and they colonize, you know, you don't really want to go up and shake their hands. So it's just kind of putting the pieces of the puzzle together. And when you get that type of information, it just kind of it just starts coming together. Anybody does a little bit of research, and they're going to start seeing this stuff, and they're going to start seeing the other things that occur, and they can even look back and see what Reagan said and put that together. And you've done all this kind of stuff, but
well,
just to
here.
hear Stephen Hawkins come out now, people are awakening. They're wakening up to that. I've got more phone calls myself about that than anybody else doing anything, which is great.
Let's be clear. Without question, one of the most important issues to resolve, and has been since the explosion of the ETs on the scene in 1947, is good intentions, bad intentions, black hat, white hat, good guys, bad guys. I mean, that's a given. Maybe they can't even be divided that way, but from the human and anthropomorphic perspective, yeah, that's it. You know, we know that people break down that way: good guys, bad guys. Are they good or bad? So, not surprisingly, there have been plenty of people who have speculated in towards the bad guy hypothesis, and some have speculated towards the good guy, and you have some that are viewing it more as a mixed bag. So, with respect to Hawking, what all he basically did was, I think, position himself a little bit and make a semi-common sense statement that, well, if there's very powerful advanced beings out there, you shouldn't talk to them. you may want to keep away from them. I mean, that's like saying, look, if you're out in the woods and there's a family of grizzlies, stay out of their way. Okay, great. But that, Hawking is obviously a lot smarter than that, and that's a silly statement, but yet I can understand why he said it. For David Jacobs, another matter. What you have with David's theories is essentially an assessment, a cogent, fairly deep assessment of what he thinks is happening based upon dealing with many hundreds of contactees. So his assessment must be given serious consideration.
Yeah.
And his assessment includes potential for colonization. It raises the very significant question, where are the hybrids? What are their intentions? All of this is non-trivial. It doesn't necessarily mean that something terrible is about to happen, but rather that this is a consideration. Others have looked at the contact evidence and come up with different assessments. So it's not the only one.
It's very true. They come up with a lot of higher consciousness. They're here to save us.
Right, yeah, beings of light.
Right.
Because there are many accounts of contact which are give every indication of being very positive and uplifting and so forth. So it's not clear cut. It is a very complex equation. So okay, great. Who is surprised at that? Right? We're dealing with almost certainly multiple species from multiple sources, most likely other planets, different planets, like we, on another planet, different from them. This is not, to me, complicated. Doesn't mean it's quite that way. Could be other possibilities here. But in any event, we can assume they have multiple agendas, different backgrounds, different perspectives. So it's like going to the UN, right? 200 and some countries, maybe 150 different languages. This is an incredibly complex dynamic that we're trying to figure out on the dark side of disclosure. In other words, we are trying to assess what is going on during a 62-year period where the government has spent billions of dollars, and that's really an understatement. They have spent billions of dollars for the express purpose of preventing us from coming up with a cogent explanation. And so we're operating in a very, restricted and polluted environment on this, and it's very tough. And that's why I think it's very important to give those that are trying to do this work a great deal of latitude as they try to sort this out. But I can say with some personal confidence that if we, at some point in the future, say 2 years down the line, have been provided, in a post-disclosure world, a relatively broad picture of what the government knows, combined with what we know, that I feel confident that we will, in general, find things in that picture very exciting, very promising, intensely interesting, all good. We are also going to find out and learn some things which are going to be disturbing and upsetting, and that we're going to have to deal with and grapple with. I feel confident that both those things will in fact be the circumstances post-disclosure. So we need to get ready for that. What can I say?
Well, what can we do to get ready for that? I've only got about a couple minutes with you, so what can we do to get ready, and what's your biggest beef?
Well, there's a bit of an irony here. If the government, of course, were to acknowledge the ET presence, which is obviously not happened yet, I think we could move very rapidly to get up to speed on this and get ready. But of course, they haven't, and having not acknowledged the ET presence, it makes it very difficult to really command a large audience, mainstream audience, and get this information to them. So the truth embargo prevents, by its very nature, a public adjustment and a public preparation on this issue. I mean, you're not going to see any discussions at any of the universities about what will we do if ETs are announced tomorrow. You're not going to see it on virtually any of the networks, mainstream networks. And so the public is still generally in the dark. However, there is a disclosure movement underway, and using the internet, which is one very powerful tool, we are substantially raising the awareness level on this issue worldwide and making progress. So the most important thing a person can do is to at least be aware of it, pay a little bit of attention, look into it a little bit, so it's not going to be a complete shock. Obviously, any help that any people can provide to accelerate the advocacy process and get disclosure done is particularly important. And there's a lot of ways that people can do that. Most importantly, funding. I mean, the one thing that has prevented the advocacy work from really putting pressure on the government has been the lack of funding, which is not an accident. The government has gone to great lengths to minimize the access to funding from this particular activist movement.
Oh my goodness! And Steve,
that's the strategy.
It's incredible. Anybody I know that's in the UFO world, they just don't have any money, and they stop making it as soon as they get involved. I've seen it.
It's called ghettoization. It's a term that I have. Intellectual ghettoization is a term that I have been using a lot. I don't know if I coined it. It doesn't matter. They ghettoized the issue. In other words, they walled the issue and the people off from the mainstream world, so that it was like you were almost shunned. And by that way, they contain it, and the people involved in it and who are ghettoized, they degrade. Their lives degrade. Their money goes away, and that obviously disempowers them. These are tools. This is a very Machiavellian but a very effective tool that governments use to prevent. Now, there are less subtle things. I mean, the Soviet Union would just grab you and put you in an insane asylum, because if you challenge the government or disapprove the government policy, you must be nuts. That's obvious, but there are much more subtle ways to do it. The U.S. government, that was one of the key parts of their truth embargo, was to intellectually ghettoize ufology, and everybody in it. Didn't matter who you were. Doctor, lawyer, astronaut, captain, general, didn't matter. You go in the UFO area, you're ghettoized. And that's nasty business.
That sounds like a bumper sticker. I am ghettoized, and I think I have one of those on the back of my car. Hey, everybody, we're talking to Stephen Bassett right now. If you'd like to call in and ask him a question, I know he would take we'll take your call. He can decide if he wants to talk to you or not. I'm sure he will. That number is 1-800-STRANGE, 1-800-STRANGE. You're listening to High Strangeness. I'm Connie Willis. We're going to be right back. We're going to talk to Stephen Bassett a little bit more, and we're going to ask him about the X conference that is coming up. All right, stick with us, Steve. All right, cool. I just wanted to throw a little outro there, Steve.
Yeah, good. Well done.
Yeah, more than anything, I wanted your answers because I want to do the, because you just got incredible sound bites. You're awesome. So,
my job is to create sound bites, Connie.
I know, and you do. I kept wanting to interrupt along the way, but then another one was coming, and I was like, oh, and Chris and I were looking at each other like, oh, there's another one. Shut up.
I'll try to shorten my response in a second part, though.
No, well, you know what? Really, that was it. Because it's a 20. Is that 20? Is that 30 minutes?
Oh, so you have what you need.
Yeah, we have what we need.
Connie Willis, the podcast. Join Connie's other shows at ConnieWillis.com.